It's not verbal. It's not a concept. It's something that when it happens, it's like this suddenly, it's evident to you that this has always been this way. It's suddenly evident to you that now there's an awareness of awareness itself, and the awareness that there's an awareness of is always here, and it's always this, and it's always like this. It never changes. And when that glimpse occurs, there's this sense of clarity. Not that you could even describe it in words, but there's this sense that, oh, that's the way it would occur. There's this sense that, oh, that's what this is. Oh, that's what they mean. Oh, that's what they're talking about. Oh, this is that. This is that. So it's something like that. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, you can't even say it's an experience, because it goes beyond that, in the sense that an experience is something that there's subject and object with. You know what I mean? I had an experience type of thing, right? There's subject and object. But there's not even, this is beyond that. This is not even an experience. Well, it's kind of like, instead of being a person, and instead of being a thinker, instead of being a physical body, right? That there's something that all of that's in. There's something that all of that appears in, but what that it appears in, isn't any of what's appearing in it. That which it's appearing in is not any of what's appearing in it. It's happening all the time, right? It's happening all the time. So one of the ways to talk about this is to say it's not so much that it begins to happen, it's always happening. What happens is what was happening that was obscuring it stops for a moment. Stops for a moment, you know? And for that moment, it's like, oh. And then a thought comes and you're right back in it. Right. See, when you move your attention from the thinking activity to being aware of the breath, at that time when you're being aware of the breath, that's when there's an opening. That's when there's a clearing for the possibility to reveal itself, because all the noise is stopped. The thinking is the noise. All the noise is stopped. If, in fact, when you move your attention to the awareness of the body breathing, you've actually done that, and you're not sitting there thinking, I'm aware of the body breathing. That wouldn't be it. No. Awareness of the body breathing, there's emptiness, there's silence. And it's evident that the body breathing is being perceived. And the perception of the body breathing is occurring through awareness, that the awareness of the body breathing is happening. So there is a recognition that the body's here breathing, and that the awareness is not that body breathing. It is aware of that body breathing. And then if you allow yourself to really kind of get the space of it, there's kind of a sense of relief there. There's this spaciousness, there's this calmness. And then a thought happens, right? And when the thought happens, it pulls you over here, and now you may be over here for a while, you know, and then all of a sudden, oh, thinking. And then you come back here, silence, stillness, peace, awareness. There's almost a scent, there's almost a sweetness, like a scent of the self. And as you practice this more consistently over time, it may take a while to get to enough of a gap. It may take a while to get to enough of an opening or get enough access that you recognize it. That if it comes like that and then it disappears, you might not catch it. But if you stay with this, eventually that space that's there when the attention moves away from the thought, the thinking activity, eventually that space that's there is open enough that you have a chance to, you have a chance to have a sense of it. Still brief, but you have a chance to have a sense of it. And one of the things about it, when it gets to a certain point in terms of the how open that possibility shows up through the practice of meditation, right? Eventually it gets to a point that you recognize that while this is only momentary, I know that what I am aware of is something that's always here. While it's only momentarily, what it is that I am aware of, it's evident to me that this is always here. This is always like this. One of the things that people who have a clear recognition, spontaneous recognition, say is they say, "Oh, you mean this? Oh, this is what you're talking about? Oh, wow, that's obvious. So I've always been aware of that." Well, you've always been aware of it, but you haven't been aware that you've been aware of it. Right? I mean, the reason I'm saying this is because one of the things that I think is necessary in order for this to take hold, right, is you've got to tease it out. You know what I mean? You've got to tease it out a little bit, to get more of a sense of what the possibility is, and to get a sense of the availability of the possibility. One of the things that's evident to me is that if you practice this long enough and you get to a point where you have a sufficient space when you're meditating, that you can actually be aware, be the awareness, right? That you get to a point in practice of meditation where when you move away from the thinking activity, it may take maybe, it depends on your practice, but it might take a little bit of time. It might take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But as you get farther, along in the practice and your breath starts to settle down by itself, in the beginning, your breathing may be more obvious, breath in and out, right? But then as you stay with it, as you just stay with it and let it start to do what it wants, it starts to get subtle and more subtle and quieter. What's that?
Do you feel light?
You could feel light. But it gets subtle. It gets very subtle. But because you're practicing, you can maintain an alertness. So you don't go unconscious. You're alert. You're awake. But it's very subtle, very still, very refreshing. Freeing, yeah. Relief, a relief. It's kind of like you can see it all, right? When you're in that sense, you kind of can see it all. You can see your history, you can see your future, you can see humanity's history, you can see humanity's future, you can be aware of all of the things, all of it, right? But you're not any of it. You're not any of it.
Is that a trance?
No, it's not a trance. The trance is what you're coming out of. Yeah. It's not so much summoning it. You get to a point where you realize you can let go. Because that's what you're doing. You're not summoning anything. You're letting go of what you were being. You were being the thinker, the person, the body, right? But through meditation, you develop an ability to recognize that can be dropped. That can just drop. So I'm trying to point to something here. Do you understand? I'm trying to use different ways to talk about how it is, right? To give you a sense of this possibility so that you might be a little more able to actually recognize it. And not only recognize it, but develop a sense of this, how this occurs, how this letting go can allow you to make the connection, how this letting go can allow you to let go of the solidity of who you are and become the space. That's kind of what it's like, to let go of the contraction, right? Because you're a contraction, did you know that? Your body is a contraction, you know what I mean? Energy that was unspecific. When you were born, that energy that was unspecific became specific, became your body. It was a contraction, right? So you could describe these practices and this work as a way of letting go that has the contraction released, that has the contraction expand. One of the ways that you can recognize that you've made contact is that you don't want to leave. It's like people who have a near-death experience and they said, I didn't want to come back. Right? One of the ways that you make contact is this experience, if I could just have this experience the rest of my life, I would choose that instead of the rest of my life. Well, seeing all the conversations about this have to do with recognizing what you're not. Because recognizing what you are is a recognizing of the absence of what you're not. Recognizing what you are is what occurs when you have recognized what you're not and see that you're not that. Yeah, if you see that you're not that, then what are you? You see, that's why inquiry is a way to get at this. Do an inquiry, look into it, take a look. Instead of trying to unlearn your conditioning, right? I mean, that can happen in time as you understand these things and so forth. But instead of trying to unlearn your conditioning, just take a look in the moment at what's there, without having to do anything to change anything. Just look. Just take a look at what's there. Of course, this look is not a look that way; it's look that way. Right? And then that look has to at some point transform into an experience of being, because you'll never see it. You can never see what you are. You can only be it. You can't see it. You're simply becoming still and silent, right? And letting all of that activity, right, just settle down. And the reason it settles down is because you're not interacting with it anymore. You see, that's the thing. If you want to learn the secret to being calm and experiencing equanimity, right, then what you have to do is realize that when thinking is occurring, because in your everyday life you have to be in the world of thought, right? So do you recognize that if you want to remain calm, you have to recognize that as thoughts arise and occur, they are either practical and useful or useless and just another form of suffering. Right? So when that happens, as you're paying attention, which is the key to the whole thing, as you're paying attention, when that happens, if you realize that some thought occurs to you that is a reaction, right? You don't get involved. You don't get involved. That's like if I say to you, look, after this class, I'm going to rob a bank. If you go with me, I'll cut you in. You don't have to do nothing, just go in and scream at people. I'll hold the gun and get the money. You're not going to go with me, but you'll follow your crazy thinking all the time. You know what I mean? And that thinking is just as crazy as what I just said. When you look at it, when you look at it, when you're relating to life in a way in which you're seeing yourself as separate from it, in conflict with it, right? Judging it and evaluating it all the time because you're identified with your mind. Your mind's doing that, but when you don't know that you're not your mind, you're doing that, right? So you get to live the life of that person that's judging and evaluating everything all the time, including yourself, including other people. And then you're trying to square them out of that, Oh, no, I'm not judging you, right? So it's a psychological game. You get involved and engage with the psychological game in your head, right? And in that psychological game, you're sizing other people up, oh, they're like this. That's what I referred to earlier when I called tranquilized obviousness. That's a very powerful concept if you understand what it's talking about. what it's pointing to is everything you think you already know. That's obvious to you, isn't it? Yeah. And it's tranquilized because you're not paying much attention to it. You're kind of relaxed into it. It shows itself in terms of what you think you know about the people you live with. The truth is you know nothing about the people you live with. The only thing you know about the people you live with, or people you're close to, right, is your interpretation of them. And that's not them. That's not them. You're having a relationship with your own mind. I was listening to Rupert interact with a guy today, and the guy said, well, you know, I've had the experience of lucid dreaming. Right? You know what lucid dreaming is? Mm-hmm. Lucid dreaming is when you're dreaming, but you know you're dreaming while you're dreaming. So you're in the dream dreaming, but you're aware that this is a dream, right? That's lucid dreaming, right? So a guy was talking to Rupert about that, and so Rupert said, yeah, so it's the same thing. This is called lucid awakeness. Lucid awakeness. You're awake and you know you're awake. Like I'm dreaming and I know I'm dreaming. See what I mean? I'm aware and I know I'm aware. That's lucid awakeness, right? That's all this is. That's really all this is lucid awakeness, is just knowing. You know, once you have an experience of who you are, you know, you can understand it conceptually, but once you have an experience of who you are, that closes the chapter. That closes a chapter on that. Now who you are is not a question, right? And it's not a question because it was actually answered. It was actually answered experientially. You asked the question and then you looked and you saw it, and when you saw it, you experienced it, and that was the answer to the question. Right there, you're different than most of the rest of humanity. Because the reason most of humanity doesn't have the question is because they thought that what they were told was the answer, not what they could experience for themselves. And they lived their whole life with that idea that what you were told was the truth. That's what I was referring to in the last class when I said that children, and I'm certain that this is the case, that the way children see the world, given the way the world's presented to them, is like adults know everything. Isn't it? When you were a kid in school, didn't you believe that everything that could be known was already known and you're just starting to learn about it? And then you grow up and you realize they don't know much about anything. I was depending on these people knowing what the hell was going on. Even though as a child, one of the things that occurred to me is I had this belief that everybody knew everything there was to know about what was going on, but somehow it didn't seem to make sense to me because the people that I was around seemed pretty crazy. Why would you be that crazy if you understood everything that was going on? So that's a hybrid. I think right now what's beginning to happen more and more is you have psychotherapists that are realizing that what they've been trained to do doesn't work very well. It's very limited, right? And so they start to look around, see what else there might be. And with meditation being as popular as it is, they fall into the mindfulness thing, right? And then after they fall into the mindfulness thing, if they pursue that, eventually they come to a recognition that mindfulness is not just stress reduction, it's actually a path. Mindfulness is actually an approach to self-realization. And if you incorporate, and a lot of psychotherapists have seen this, if you incorporate that with the traditional psychotherapy, there's kind of a hybrid there that you can work with people, and you're dealing with both things at once. You're dealing with their symptoms, psychological symptoms, or some form of mental disturbance, and the potential they have to realize who they are at the same time. And my experience has been, if a person engages with the process of self-realization, that whatever issues they had psychologically clear up along the way. They have to clear up along the way. Why? Because the psychological issues that were had by the person. And the essence of the teaching is the person isn't real, right? So if the person isn't real, right, all you have to do is get that that's the case, and the symptoms that are being caused by considering the person to be real disappear. Can you see how that has to follow? Sure. Has to follow. The way it seems to occur to me, and the way I hear other people describe it, is that there's really no way to understand what goes on that brings this about. For some people, they could trip and fall and have an awakening, you know? So we know certain things. We know that there is a lot of instances where it seems to be associated with a very intense event, like a death, or something intense, a diagnosis, terminal diagnosis, or a death. But we also know that it happens spontaneously to people that don't know anything about this. So that lends itself to the idea that it's God, that whatever we are, that which we are, is in an evolutionary process in which it opens up, or it has certain mind-body organisms, right? It has certain mind-body organisms awaken and recognize what's happening, like the lights go on. If you let go, what are you letting go to? If you let go, what are you letting go to, right? You're letting go to the idea. It's just like the idea of destiny. People find it so hard to accept the idea that you don't have free will, or that destiny is, what it is. It's all predetermined, right? But when you really look closely, what's so hard about getting that that's the case? Because if you don't have free will, because who you thought you were is only a concept, there's no actual person that has consciousness. The person can be recognized as a construct or a conditioned reality within consciousness, but it doesn't have consciousness, right? So when you recognize that and you realize that if the person that you considered to be real isn't real, then whose destiny are we talking about? It's that simple. Whose free will are we talking about? If there isn't anyone to have or not to have free will, then what's the case? Then what is true, right? Well, if you take the personality out of the picture, what's left?
Awareness.
Yeah. And that awareness can be described as being God. Can it not? The source, cosmic law, awareness, consciousness, right? But can you see that when we say no free will, all we're saying is that's where everything is coming from? What's so hard? If you get that that who you think you are is a made up, right? Who you think you are is made up, and the made up version of yourself that you have thought that you were, thought it had free will. It thought it had free will. But just like Ramana Maharshi says, you could take this one phrase and just make this your mantra. It'll probably be, if you made this one phrase your mantra, it would probably be very powerful in terms of your popping out of the illusion, right? And the statement that Ramana Maharshi made was that there is a presupposed non-existent being, right? Presupposed. In other words, it's a supposition, right? Presupposed non-existent, right? Being that seeks liberation for that non-existent being. Where is that going to go? It can't go anywhere. It can't go anywhere. And if you really get that statement, really, if you really digest that statement, then the idea that there's no free will should be obvious to you. Who would have the free will? Who are we talking? See, when you resist the idea that thy will be done, that resistance is your personality. That's all. It has to be. That resistance is because it's trying to hold on to its existence. It's trying to hold on to the idea that it's real. But if you let it in, if you really let it all the way in, right, that it's not real, the idea that there's no free will is obvious. Who is it that's going to have the free will? It opens up the whole can of worms, right? And then if you practice the idea that there's no free will, if you practice the idea that all of what's happening is a cause-effect situation, right? But it's a universal operation of cause-effect, right? And it manifests itself in individual cause and effect bodies, right? And then when they die, that cause and effect process continues universally, right? So the idea that you're involved at all is an illusion. It's an illusion. And if you get that in your heart and soul, then you can practice in such a way where you can get to a place where you can begin to sit and be still and be quiet, and it's like having an oxygen mask on. You know what I mean? It's like stepping out of reality and looking at it, but you're not in that reality anymore. And all the effects of being in it stop. You see what I'm saying? All the effects of being a physical body, being a personality, living in time, having a past and a future, dealing with Russia, dealing with Putin, dealing with your kids, dealing with your husband, dealing with your finances. The whole thing is over there now. The whole thing is over there now, and I'm aware of it, but unaffected at all by the fact that that's the case. And then the idea is that that experience becomes so fulfilling, right? That it gets to the point, I find myself now, I do my formal practice and then I can't get out of it. I do my formal practice, I walk downstairs, I sit in the family room, and I look at my watch and an hour and a half has passed. So that's the nectar of the fruit, do you know what I mean? You know, there are a lot of people who've practiced meditation and got to the point where they were able to have this experience that would have to be pulled out of it, because once they were in it, that's what happened to Ramana Maharshi, you know, that he had this experience when he was very young, and then he just naturally, you know, followed the where it led him, which was to this holy temple, right? This is a kid. He goes to this holy temple, right, after he has his experiences, takes his clothes off, throws them away, throws his money away, right, and goes and sits in the temple and goes into what's called self-absorption, samadhi, self-absorption. That's another way of describing this experience of being the awareness, right? It's so fulfilling, it's like you don't want to do, you know, you don't want to move, right? And he stayed like that for a long time until people had to pull him out of there because he was dying. His body was rotting. Insects were eating his body, and it was totally irrelevant to him. Right? So that's the state of complete absorption, right? But then he gradually was able to come back and relate to people. So the thing about it is this, is that what you come to realize, and I think that's what he came to realize, is that once you've had that experience, you know, and you've had some time with that experience, like sitting in that absorbed state, right, that you can get to a point where you realize, well, that you can talk and you can act and you can still be in the experience. That's what it's like. You know, you have to kind of relearn how to be in the world differently. I'm not in the world, I'm not of the world, but I'm in the world, right? You have to relearn how to be in the world differently, where you could be the personality in order to function. And you could identify with the physical body in order to function and see yourself as separate from other people so you could interact, right? Right? But the thing that keeps you connected to the truth and keeps you free from the burden of existence is that you know that there's no free will at all. This is all just happening now. Look at the relief that it gives you when you realize that you never did anything, you can never do anything, and the only possibility really is for you to be present. That's why they call it presence. You never did anything, you can never do anything. The only thing that's possible is for you to be present and be aware of what's happening. And that's the whole thing.